All right, welcome to com2400, our first video lecture notes. If you want to sign up on eLearning to get an email notification, it will send you an email as soon as I have it posted. We're going to start with Section 1. Section 1 will cover the history of radio and where radio is today, and then Section 2 will cover television, and same thing, history of television, where that goes. Section 1 will take us up through Exam 1. Exam 2 will cover TV, and then our final exam will cover combination of both, as well as a couple extra presentations in there as well too. All right, so let's start with radio communications. We're going to start with history and cover a lot of ground here. This first lecture notes won't go as long as the other ones. This just kind of gets you into it, but we're going to cover this, and we're going to cover 6 different pioneers of radio and how they influenced radio and where it came from and where it is today. Our first guy is Samuel Morse. He was the one that invented the telegraph, and it was the first radio. Samuel Morse actually successfully invented the telegraph system. There were other people that tried it and didn't find that it worked, but Samuel Morse was actually the first one to make it work. He was also the person that saw a commercial use in radio. Obviously, when we get talking more about this here in a few minutes, we're going to see that the government gets involved, and we can see the practical use for the military. But Samuel Morse actually saw a commercial success in the telegraph, so we really have our first entry into the broadcast market to make money, if you will. Telegraph was originally relied on a physical cable from point A to point B, and it was used, and they had to use Morse code. It was just dots and dashes. It was an audible dots and dashes sent over a wire from location to location. So in order to receive a message on Samuel Morse's telegraph, you had to be at a location where the wire was actually connected to, similar to what a landline telephone would be today. So you couldn't, homes back there weren't wired for telegraph. You actually had to go to a telegraph office. During Samuel Morse's process of inventing the workable telegraph, he did a lot of experimentation with a lot of different equipment and wires to see which one worked the best. But he finally settled on one, and his first public demonstration was in 1838. Now you can see that I've starred or put an asterisk next to that date. Anytime you see an asterisk in our notes, you'll want to underline it, circle it, highlight it in your notes somehow, because that'll be a pretty important date to remember for your exam. So kind of give you a heads up on that. But in 1838 was Samuel Morse's first public demonstration to show that the telegraph actually worked. Shortly after that, well, about 7 years after that, in 1844, the United States government gave him $30,000 to construct an experimental line from Washington to Baltimore. So at this point in 1844, again, that's asterisk, we see the government seeing a potential need for this telegraph, and it really comes to more of the military aspect than more of the consumer aspect. But the government really saw that there was a potential need and potential future for this technology. The first message that was sent over the telegraph was "What hath got wrought," and it was completed over the lines on May 24th, 1844. The important thing to remember on this particular note for your notes is what the message was. I probably will put the date on an exam or on a quiz, but I'm more looking for you to understand what the actual message was. Now we're going to talk about the first message in radio later in this section, but this was the first message that was sent over a telegraph in a public demonstration. Samuel Morse, as I mentioned, saw the potential commercial success of the telegraph. The government gets involved in 1844. Then we also see in 1851, Western Union becomes a business, and they actually created the first transcontinental telegraph line in 1861. And they used the railroad right-of-ways to build their infrastructure. So Western Union begins its business in the telegraph spectrum. So you'll just need to know in this particular slide who the company is. It was Western Union. Western Union is still around today. You can wire money back and forth to people, but their first entry into the communications business was through the telegraph. In its beginning, the Morse code telegraph, or the Morse telegraph, the dots and dashes you could hear, so you had to have an operator who understood the code. It was also could be printed onto a paper tape, a long tape. If you've ever seen the old tape machines for the stock exchange, it spit it out. It was probably an inch wide, and it ran for however long of paper you actually had. So it was printed onto the paper as well. But the operators on both ends had to memorize the Morse code, because it was just dots and dashes, and so they had to memorize it. And if they didn't know the code, they wouldn't be able to discern what the message was. But a well-trained operator could transmit 40 to 50 words a minute, which is pretty fast if you think about how fast someone could really type. If you can type 40 to 50 words a minute, that's pretty fast too. So these guys got pretty good at learning the code. And obviously, when it came to the military, they were very acute at learning that as well too. And they came up with their own code within Morse code once other countries grabbed onto this technology. Until 1877, all rapid long-distance communication depended on the telegraph. So if you wanted to send a message from Washington to Baltimore, from Detroit to Chicago, you had to use a telegraph. There just simply was no other way of doing it other than physically taking the message, riding on horseback, and taking it to another city. So up until 1877, the only way to almost instantaneously get a message from point A to point B was to use the telegraph. In 1877, though, something changed, and we had the invention of the telephone. And that was a huge, huge change, because not only could we still send Morse code over dots and dashes over a code, now we could actually talk, and that was a huge advance in this field. Our second person to enter the realm of radio was a guy by the name of Marconi. I won't even attempt to say his first name because I know I'm going to butcher it. But Marconi had the wireless telegraphy. And up until this point, we had to have a wire, like I said, going from point A to point B. And in order to get it to point C, you had to build another wire and so forth. But Marconi actually invented a way to send a message over the air with wireless technology. And this was actually the beginning of radio. When we look back at the history of radio, the wireless telegraph was the actual beginnings of radio. Now, it wasn't used to play music or play NPR or anything else. It was used strictly to send messages from point A to point B or to point C or whatever you needed to do. But you didn't need to have a physical wire. Okay. Now, Marconi proved the feasibility of radio communications, and he actually owned the patent on this wireless technology. He did a lot of things, a lot of experimentation, but he actually proved that the feasibility of this technology was possible. Another thing to actually underline in your notes is that he was an Italian inventor. Okay, I might talk about that in the quizzes or the exam. He sent and received his first radio signal in Italy in 1895. And again, I have that asterisk on that date as well too. So Marconi, got to remember that Marconi sent the first wireless radio signal in 1895. In 1899, the first wireless Morse code signal was transmitted from England to France. Now, you might not think it's a big deal, but this is a wireless transmission. So they did not have to lay a wire from England to France. It was the first wireless transmission sent from one country to another, and that was in 1899. Again, that started. In 1902, the letter S was transmitted from England to Newfoundland, and this was considered the first successful transatlantic radio telegraph message. All right. So again, now we're getting into longer distances. We went from England to France in 1899, and then in 1902, we were able to send a message from New England to Newfoundland. Again, this is all via the wireless telegraph. The wireless radio actually proved to be an effective rescue for the sea disasters. This was huge. If you had a ship out at sea and it was sinking, you could send a wireless message to somebody, hopefully on land, that would receive the message and come to their rescue. In 1901, the U.S. Navy adopted the wireless telegraph system to put on all of its ships. Up until then, They actually used hand signals, light signals. They even used homing pigeons to get messages to land. Obviously, that was very ineffective because you had to be able to see the next vessel, or you had to see the land for any kind of hand signals, and you relied on homing pigeons to actually find their way there. So if you're out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, I don't think a homing pigeon is going to make it back to land, but that's all they had to use. So in 1901, the U.S. Navy adopted this wireless system, and they put it on all their ships. Now in 1909, a guy by the name of Robert Peary used a radio to broadcast an important message, and he broadcasted the words, "I found the pole." So Robert Peary went to the North Pole, and he used this wireless system to relay that message. Our third important key figure in the radio industry is a guy by the name of Lee DeForest, and he invented something called the audition tube. We'll talk about that here in a second. He also built a company in 1902 called the Wireless Telephone Company. And he basically, Lee DeForest, was interested in voice and music transmission. He understood that we could send Morse code back and forth, but he really, really wanted to enhance voice and music transmission. DeForest was really the first person to use the word radio. Up until this point, the word radio was never used. So he was kind of the father of radio because he actually used it. Like I said before, his biggest breakthrough in the ability to use voice and music was something called the audition tube, vacuum tube. And there's a picture of it down there on the lower right. Basically, it was an amplification tube. It took the radio signals and boosted the signals so you could actually hear distinguishing human voice and music or anything else that you wanted to send across the airwaves. But this audition tube actually amplified the signal and made it possible for today's radio to become what it was. Just a quick picture there of what his rendering was. I guess you could call him one of the very first nerds. I mean, you think about this back in 1906, for a person to think about needing this and then drawing a picture of what he thought it would take to build it.
All right, that ends our notes for today. Just a reminder, next week, Wednesday, will be our Quiz 1, and it covers Chapter 1 notes only, which are these. Have a good week.